Sarah. And it's that sad course.
You open your mouth about this, and I'll make sure you're blacklisted from every restaurant in this city. That's what he told her. In a dark corner of the prep kitchen, between the hum of the refrigerator and the smell of burnt oil, that's where Troy Benson decided to drop the mask. His voice was low, sharp, more of a hiss than a threat. And Monique Rivers? She just stood there, frozen. One hand in a splint, the other gripping her apron tight like it was the only thing keeping her from falling apart. But she didn't scream, didn't cry, just nodded, quietly, and walked right back onto the floor with a smile so convincing it made you feel guilty for not noticing the pain behind it. Welcome to Ruby's Flame, a soul food diner tucked away on the edge of New Orleans, where jazz plays low from a dusty corner speaker, and regulars know their waitstaff by name. But behind the red checkered curtains and the clatter of plates, something darker brewed. Something that smelled less like grease and more like fear. Monique had been working here for 3 years. Never late. Never complained. Always the first to cover a shift when someone called out. But ever since her accident, an accident that wasn't really an accident, things had changed. She still showed up. Still smiled. But the light behind her eyes? Fading. And yet, no one said anything. Maybe they didn't see. Maybe they didn't want to. But one man did. Earl Thompson. The old guy in the denim jacket who sat in the same booth every Tuesday, sipping his black coffee slow like he had all the time in the world. What no one knew was that Earl wasn't just a customer. He owned the place. And what he was about to uncover would shake the very foundation of the diner, and change Monique's life forever. So, sit tight. Because this story, it starts with a broken hand, and ends with a truth no one saw coming. Ruby's Flame wasn't just another hole-in-the-wall diner. It was the kind of place where stories lingered longer than the scent of smoked sausage. Nestled between a closed-down barbershop and a thrift store that hadn't changed its window display since the 90s, it had a heartbeat of its own. You walked in and were greeted by the warm scent of cornbread, slow-cooked greens, and Louisiana heat soaked into the walls. The booths were cracked leather, the counters nicked from years of coffee mugs sliding across them, and the jukebox in a corner still worked on quarters, playing old-school jazz and Motown hits like it was 1965. Most folks didn't know the place had history. Real history. Earl's grandmother, Ruby, opened it back in the civil rights era. It became a safe haven back then, a spot where black folks could sit, eat, laugh, and be seen. Through the decades, Ruby's Flame outlasted gentrification, hurricanes, and more rent hikes than Earl cared to remember. But lately, something about the place had felt, thus. That change had a name. Troy Benson. On paper, Troy was perfect. Late 30s, clean-cut, knew how to flash a charming smile. He spoke in sound bites, the kind of guy who made himself look good in meetings and staff photos. Earl had hired him during a rough patch, needing someone young to help modernize operations. But what Earl didn't realize was that Troy wasn't interested in preserving a legacy. He was looking for leverage. To the customers, Troy was the friendly face behind the counter, all teeth and confidence. But to the staff, he was a different man entirely. Passive-aggressive 1 minute, outright hostile the next. He ran the place like a dictatorship, and his favorite target was always Monique. He called it discipline. Earl would later learn it was something much uglier. Under Troy's watch, staff turnover had spiked, morale had dropped, and customer complaints had started to trickle in. Not about the food, but about the energy. That unspoken heaviness you couldn't quite name but always felt in the room. The kitchen still ran. The plates still came out hot. But the soul of Ruby's Flame? It was dimming. And it all led back to the man in the iron slacks and the expensive watch, hiding rot behind a rehearsed grin. The burn on her wrist had barely started to heal when the fracture happened. It was a Wednesday, just after the lunch rush. The floor was slick with grease that hadn't been mopped yet, and Monique had just finished boxing up 3 takeout orders. As she turned to grab another set of napkins, Troy came barreling through the narrow kitchen aisle, fast, careless, and with a tray full of condiments. Their shoulders collided. Monique slipped, her arm twisting beneath her as she caught herself on the edge of the sink. The sound that followed was sharp. A pop. A crunch. And then, silence, just long enough for everyone to stop and look. She didn't scream. Didn't cry. Just clenched her jaw and stood up, cradling her left wrist against her chest. Her skin had gone pale under the brown, sweat pooling at her temples. Troy, without missing a beat, laughed it off. "Y'all, somebody needs to stop walking like she owns the place." Nobody laughed with him. Monique sat out the rest of her shift in the break room, holding ice over the swelling. She should have gone to the ER right then. Should have filed an injury report. But instead, she stayed, because she knew how Troy worked. A trip to the hospital meant a write-up. A second write-up meant a pattern of behavior. And Troy was the one filling out the reports. That night, Troy slid a clipboard across the table to her. "Sign this. Says the fall was your fault. No one else saw it, and I already talked to the owner. We don't want to make a fuss." She stared at the form. No medical coverage. No assistance. Just a checkbox that said she acknowledged she was responsible for unsafe movement in the workplace. Her hand throbbed. She signed it anyway. By the next morning, her wrist was wrapped in a stiff, drugstore splint. No cast. No paid leave. And no rest. Troy had scheduled her for a double. "You still got one good hand," he told her, smirking. "I expect to see tables turned and tips up. Don't start thinking this place runs on sympathy." So she showed up. She poured coffee, cleared plates, balanced trays on her forearm. Customers noticed. One even asked if she was okay. She smiled. Because that was the job now. Smile through the pain and pray it didn't get worse. Earl Thompson wasn't the kind of man who jumped to conclusions. Years in the military had taught him to observe, to let patterns speak louder than emotions. But that morning, as he stirred sugar into his black coffee and watched Monique limp between tables with her splinted hand, something didn't sit right. She was clearly in pain. Her movements stiff. Her smile slower to rise. And yet, not once did she pause to complain. She took orders, bussed tables, refilled water glasses like she was on autopilot, like there was no room for weakness. When Troy walked past Earl's booth, laughing loudly into his phone, Earl called out casually, "That girl's working hurt. Shouldn't she be off the floor?" Troy didn't break stride. He just turned slightly and waved a hand like it was nothing. "Monique? She's dramatic, man. Always pulling something. Claims she can't use her hand, but I caught her texting with it yesterday. She just doesn't want to do real work." Earl didn't laugh. Texting. Earl had watched Monique for weeks. Not once had he seen her use that hand. Not to lift, not to gesture, not to scratch her own cheek. She moved like someone guarding pain, not milking it. And the way she used her good arm to steady a full tray of food? That wasn't the kind of effort someone fakes. Troy's comment stuck in Earl's mind like a burr. It wasn't just dismissive, it was strategic. Rehearsed. Later that day, as Earl sipped the last of his lukewarm coffee, he noticed something else. Troy handed a clipboard to one of the newer waitresses. She hesitated, glanced at Monique, then signed quickly before slipping it under the counter. Earl couldn't see what was written, but the body language said enough. Fear. Reluctance. Pressure. That night, as he walked past the glowing neon sign on his way out, Earl paused. Ruby's Flame had always been a place of dignity. His grandmother built it on the idea that every person deserved respect, no matter the color of their skin, the weight of their wallet, or the pain in their bones. But something had shifted. And the more Troy talked, the more Earl felt it. Lies wrapped in confidence, truth buried beneath paperwork. He wasn't sure what was happening yet. But he knew one thing. Monique wasn't the problem. And he was going to find out who was. It was late, almost closing time, when it happened. Most of the customers had filtered out, leaving only a couple in the far booth nursing cold coffee and quiet conversation. The kitchen was winding down, the scent of grease replaced by disinfectant and mop water. Monique was in the back storage room, stacking paper napkins and restocking plastic cutlery when she heard the door swing shut behind her. She turned, and there he was. Troy. His tie loosened, sleeves rolled up, but his grin sharp as ever. He leaned against the doorframe like he had all the time in the world, eyes trailing her movements like a snake watching a cornered mouse. "You think you're slick, huh?" he said, his tone low, voice oily. Monique stiffened, but kept her back straight. "I'm just doing my job." He stepped closer. "No, see, you're doing more than that. I see the way you look at me when you think I ain't watching. I know you've been talking to people, dropping little hints, smiling at the old man in the booth like he's gonna save you." Monique opened her mouth to speak, but he cut her off. Don't play dumb with me. I've been doing this a long time, sweetheart. And people like you don't get to play victim and keep your paycheck." He was close now. Too close. Then came the line, the one that carved itself into her memory like a scar. "You open your mouth about this, and I'll make sure you're blacklisted from every restaurant in this city." The silence that followed was deafening. Monique stood frozen, her good hand gripping the edge of the shelf behind her, knuckles white. She didn't cry, didn't flinch, but something inside her shook. Not from fear, but from fury. A slow, deep burning kind of anger that couldn't find a voice yet. Troy leaned in a little more, like he was daring her to break. Then he laughed, short, mocking, and turned to leave. As the door swung closed behind him, Monique's breath returned. Shaky. Measured. She looked down at her injured hand, wrapped in bandages, still useless. But her eyes? They were no longer afraid. She knew now, this wasn't just about her injury. This was about control. About silence. And Monique had decided, she wouldn't stay quiet forever. Earl Thompson had never been one for snooping. He believed in straight talk, in giving people the rope to either climb or hang themselves. But after what he'd seen, and what he suspected, he knew watching from the corner booth wasn't enough anymore. It was a Thursday evening when the opportunity came. Troy had left early, mumbling something about meeting a distributor uptown. Monique was on dish duty, and the closing crew moved like clockwork, cleaning grills and wiping counters. Earl waited until most of the staff were out back taking trash to the dumpster, then made his move. He slipped behind the counter like he belonged there, because, technically, he did. The office door was unlocked, which surprised him. Troy never struck him as the careless type. Inside, the air was stale, thick with the scent of cheap cologne and paper dust. A small fan whirred in the corner, pushing heat from the single desk lamp around the room. Earl sat down slowly, hands steady. He wasn't there to take anything, just to see. The first drawer was filled with takeout menus and old coupons. Useless. But the second, that one was different. Neatly stacked forms. Labeled folders. But all the paperwork seemed oddly curated. Almost too clean. He pulled out one labeled, Employee Performance Reports. The moment he flipped through, Monique's name jumped out like a red flag. Page after page, late arrival, customer complaint, refused to follow instructions, hostile attitude. None of it matched what Earl had seen firsthand. He'd been coming in 3 days a week, minimum, and not once had Monique raised her voice, disrespected a customer, or slacked off. The reports were a paper trail, fabricated, methodical, and clearly intended to build a case against her. Then he found something worse. An envelope marked, Cash Log, Weekly. Earl opened it and scanned the figures. The numbers didn't add up. The sales were too high, the deposits too low. And the adjustments. All handwritten in pencil, signed off only by Troy. No witness initials. No oversight. Earl leaned back, his stomach tight. This wasn't just mismanagement. It was theft. Intentional. Quiet. And Monique. She wasn't a liability, she was the scapegoat. He put everything back the way he found it, careful to leave no trace. As he stepped out of the office, The clatter of dishes and soft jazz from the jukebox filled the air again. But to Earl, Ruby's flame didn't sound the same anymore. It sounded like betrayal. Friday morning came with a chill in the air. The kind that slipped through the door with every customer and lingered just long enough to make you notice. Earl sat in his usual booth, sipping his coffee, eyes drifting between Monique and the front counter. She moved a little slower today, her injured hand tucked closer to her body. Her smile still came when it had to, but it no longer reached her eyes. The toll was showing. As the lunch crowd started to trickle in, a familiar voice called out from the entrance. "Lord, it's colder than a tax collector's heart out there." Earl looked up to see Letitia James walking in, mid-60s, church hat slightly tilted, cane tapping in rhythm with her heels. She'd been coming to Ruby's Flame since Earl's grandmother ran it. A sharp-tongued woman with a memory like steel and an eye that missed nothing. She slid into the booth across from him like she owned the place. "You're early," Earl said with a grin. "I'm old," she replied, pulling off her gloves. "Early's the only speed I've got left." They chatted for a while. Weather, grandkids, politics. But then her eyes drifted to Monique. "That girl," Letitia said, voice lowering. "She's hurting." Earl nodded. "She's been through it lately." Letitia's expression shifted, concern replacing small talk. "You know I come in here enough to see things," she said. "And I saw something the other day that didn't sit right with me. That manager, Troy, he accidentally dropped a tub of ice on her foot last week. Claimed it slipped. But I saw his hand. He let it go on purpose." Earl leaned in, his grip tightening around his mug. "You sure?" he asked quietly. "I may be old," Letitia said, "but I'm not blind." That girl didn't even scream. Just stood there, shaking, like she expected it. She paused, then added, "And the cameras?" Strangely, that corner of the kitchen wasn't working that day. Funny how that happens. Earl didn't speak. He didn't need to. Letitia had just confirmed what he was beginning to suspect. This wasn't random. It was a pattern. A cruel one. Calculated. Rehearsed. Letitia took a slow sip of her sweet tea, eyes narrowed. "You gonna do something about it?" she asked, like she already knew the answer. Earl looked over at Monique, at the strength it took for her to keep going. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "I am." It was nearly 11 p.m. when Earl pulled his truck into the darkened parking lot behind Ruby's Flame. The diner had closed hours earlier, but the back door light was still on. He killed the engine, stepped out, and moved with the quiet confidence of a man who'd once spent nights crawling through hostile terrain with nothing but instinct and resolve. Tonight felt like one of those nights. He'd gotten a tip, from one of the dishwashers, that Troy often came back late, sometimes with a buddy, sometimes alone. Said he called it closing paperwork, but nothing ever made it into the system after 8 p.m. Earl crept toward the alley that ran behind the building, staying low. A window near the office had been left cracked open, probably for smoke, judging by the faint scent of cheap cigars drifting through the air. Voices floated out, muffled at first, then clearer as Earl got closer. "You get the cash count from last week," one voice said. It was Troy. "Yeah," a second man replied, younger, more nervous. "You really skimming that much? What if the owner finds out?" Earl held his breath. Troy snorted. "The old man? Please. That fossil comes in here twice a week and sips coffee like it's his retirement plan. He has no idea." He laughed, short and smug. "I've got this place locked down. Monique takes the fall for every short register. I got files stacked on her. Fake complaints, made up incidents. If anything ever hits the fan, guess who's eating the blame?" The other man whistled low. "That's cold, man." Troy's voice dropped. "You think that's cold? I broke her damn wrist when she caught me skimming last month. Told her if she squealed, I'd finish the job. She hasn't said a word since, has she?" Earl's heart stopped. His fists clenched so tight his knuckles ached. Every instinct screamed to barge in, to drag Troy out by his collar. But he held back. He needed more than rage. He needed proof. The conversation inside continued, laced with arrogance and dark amusement. They talked about flipping the place to a lounge, about how Monique was just a stepping stone in a bigger plan. Earl stepped back from the window, the bile rising in his throat. This wasn't just mismanagement. This was abuse. Criminal. Personal. And it was happening under his roof. Not anymore. Saturday night at Ruby's Flame felt different. The lights were a little warmer, the music a little softer. The regulars had all been invited under the guise of a special anniversary dinner. Staff wore crisp uniforms. The tables were dressed with fresh flowers, and the menu featured old favorites from back when Ruby herself still ran the kitchen. Troy was glowing. He walked the floor like a king, shaking hands, cracking jokes, even posed for a few photos with customers. To him, the night was a celebration of how well things were going. Earl, as always, sat in his usual booth near the corner, calm, quiet, watching. Monique moved through the room with her familiar grace, though the tension in her shoulders hadn't eased. Her splinted hand was tucked behind her apron. She didn't know what Earl was planning. Nobody did. Not until he stood up. Earl tapped his spoon gently against the side of his glass. The soft metallic ring brought a hush over the room. Conversations stopped. Heads turned. Even Troy paused in the middle of a laugh. "Evening, folks," Earl began, voice steady. "Before dessert comes out, I'd like to say a few words." Troy's smile twitched, uneasy. Sure, Mr. Thompson. Tell him about the old days." Earl didn't smile back. "I will," he said, "but first, I need to talk about today." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a thin folder. "What I'm about to share may come as a surprise. Some of you know me as the quiet guy who drinks coffee and tips well. What most of you don't know is that I own Ruby's Flame." The room gasped. Troy went pale. Earl opened the folder and laid out several pages on the center table. Scanned reports, altered financials, fabricated complaints, all with Troy's signature. "These documents show that someone has been stealing from this business, manipulating records, framing a member of our team to cover their tracks." He turned to Troy, voice sharper now. "I heard what you said. I know what you've done." And just like that, two uniformed officers stepped through the front door. Troy tried to speak. This is a mistake." But no one was listening. The only sound that filled the diner was the clink of handcuffs and the soft murmur of justice settling into place. The tension in the room shifted the moment the officers stepped in. Two of them, both in clean navy uniforms with calm but unreadable expressions, made their way toward the center of the diner. One glanced at Earl, who gave a small nod. That was all it took. Troy took a step back. "Wait, hang on, you can't just, this isn't real," he stammered, pointing toward the folder Earl had dropped on the table. "This is a setup. He's lying. You don't have proof." But the officers weren't interested in excuses. One pulled a folded document from his back pocket, a warrant. The other stepped forward. "We've got more than enough, Mr. Benson," the officer said, voice flat. "You have the right to remain silent." The words fell heavy over the crowd, each line measured, clear, final. Troy spun around, searching for an ally, someone to back him up, someone to speak in his defense. But every face he met had the same look: disappointment, disgust, disbelief. Even the cooks had stepped out from the kitchen, arms folded, eyes locked on him. He had ruled the place with fear for months. Now he stood alone. The officers placed the cuffs on his wrists, the metallic click echoing through the silence like a hammer striking truth. Troy didn't resist. His hands shook. His voice cracked. "I made this place money," he muttered, like it would matter. But it didn't. They walked him through the dining room, past tables he used to lean on with fake charm and empty jokes, past the customers he'd schmoozed and the staff he'd mistreated, and finally, past Monique, who stood near the counter, shoulders straight, jaw set, eyes full of quiet strength. He didn't look at her. Couldn't. The glass door opened, and just like that, Troy Benson was gone. Outside, the cruiser's lights flashed red and blue against the brick walls. Inside, the room slowly exhaled. The air felt different. Lighter. Like someone had opened a window that had been stuck shut for far too long. Earl sat back down, his hands folded calmly on the table. Monique didn't speak. She didn't have to. The moment had spoken for her. For every tray she carried with one hand, for every shift she survived, for every time she swallowed the urge to quit. Justice, finally, had come walking through the front door. The next morning, Ruby's Flame opened like it always did. Coffee brewed in the back. The kitchen sizzled with bacon and fried catfish. Customers trickled in, curious, cautious, some still replaying the scene from the night before. But something felt different. It wasn't just the absence of Troy's voice barking from the kitchen, or the way the staff moved with less tension in their shoulders. It was the shift in the air, like something had been lifted. Like the diner could finally breathe again. Monique showed up at 6:58 a.m., 2 minutes early as always. She walked in wearing the same apron, same smile, but her posture said everything had changed. For the first time in months, no one was watching her like a hawk. No one was waiting for her to slip up. She was just there. And it felt good. Earl was already at his usual booth, coffee steaming in front of him. When he saw her walk in, he stood. Quiet. Steady. "Monique," he said, his voice kind. She looked up, unsure of what came next. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a key. Not just any key, the key. The one that unlocked the back office. The one that meant decisions, schedules, payroll, and trust. "I've been watching you for a long time," he said. "You held this place together when someone else tried to tear it apart. You showed more leadership under pressure than most people ever do with a title. And if this place is going to have a future, it needs someone who actually gives a damn about it." He held the key out to her. "I want you to take over as floor supervisor. Starting today." Monique didn't move at first. She just stared at the key in his hand like it might vanish if she blinked too hard. Then she reached for it, slowly, like it meant more than metal and teeth. She held it in her palm, glanced down, then looked back at Earl with glassy eyes. "You sure?" she whispered. Earl smiled. "I've never been more sure of anything." And just like that, Monique Rivers wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was the heartbeat of Ruby's Flame, and now she had the key to prove it. Justice doesn't always arrive with flashing lights and grand speeches. Sometimes it walks in quietly, wearing a denim jacket and sipping black coffee. Sometimes it's carried not by fists or fury, but by people who simply refuse to stop showing up. People like Monique Rivers. In a world that often overlooks quiet strength, she endured. Not because she had to, but because she believed in something better. A better day. A better life. A better place, even if it didn't exist yet. And maybe that's what courage really looks like. Not big, dramatic gestures, but small, stubborn acts of persistence. Coming in on time. Doing the work. Smiling even when it hurts. Holding your ground when nobody else is watching. Ruby's Flame didn't change because someone yelled louder. It changed because someone chose to see, really see, what was happening behind the scenes. Because one man decided that silence was no longer acceptable. And because one woman refused to be broken by a system designed to dismiss her. What happened in that little diner in New Orleans wasn't just about money or power, or even justice. It was about dignity. About reclaiming it. Protecting it. And making sure no one ever took it away again. So maybe, the next time you're sitting in a coffee shop or being served by someone who looks tired but still manages to smile, you'll remember Monique. Maybe you'll look a little closer. Ask a little kinder. Notice a little more. Because people like her, they carry the world on one hand, and still manage to hold it together. If this story moved you, even just a little, we invite you to be part of something bigger. Hit that subscribe button to hear more stories of resilience, truth, and quiet heroes who walk among us every day. Share this video with someone who might need a reminder that strength isn't always loud, but it's always powerful. And drop a comment below. Tell us, have you ever seen something unfair and stepped up? Or do you wish you had? Your story might just inspire someone else to do the same. Because change doesn't start with a crowd. It starts with one person. Just like Monique. Just like you.